Faultlines.
And we're back. You're listening to Faultlines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are joined for this segment by Steve Grumbine, political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. Those are, by the way, a 501c3 and 501c4, respectively, dedicated to education and advocacy for modern monetary theory. Steve, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, great to have you. By the way, for those listening, you can check his website out. That's realprogressives.org. Just like that. Great URL, realprogressives.org. Also check him out on Twitter at realprogressivesUS. That's his handle again, realprogressivesUS. Steve, thank you for joining us. We're talking about modern monetary theory, the possibility of pending economic collapse, and also some alternatives to the USD. Bitcoin, other altcoins, just other alternative currencies. We were actually just closing out with something. What's your I don't think we've talked about this on air before. What are your thoughts on alternative currencies? How could we think about alternative currencies using the lens, putting the hat on, thinking about it from a modern monetary theory perspective? Do you see these currencies as competing, or do you just see them as sort of different measures of value that can be corresponded? How do you see alternative currencies fitting in with the USD, Steve?
Well, thank you for having me on again. As far as things like Bitcoin go, they're more like an envelope. Okay, they're more like an envelope, a store of value, and usually stored in the value of U.S. dollars. People are not buying things in Bitcoin; they're buying things in a USD valued coin. And it's really more of a commodity than it is an actual currency. So all the promise and all the excitement and enthusiasm, about having a private currency outside of the centralized currencies of, the central banking system, et cetera. It's certainly very appealing, for privacy enthusiasts and stuff like that, but it doesn't really hold the muster for what an actual currency is. And to be fair, there really is no meaningful way of exchanging it at this point. People, when they get these things, are typically getting them as a means of masking, trades back and forth in U.S. dollars, to be fair, or the currency of their country. So, it's not really in competition in any way. The state has absolute control over the larger currency, and it's tied to the global system. I believe you said in the last segment, discussing about, how the system itself is sort of keeping us where we are. Well, this system is massive, and it has the power of the state behind it, the power of taxation to maintain its value. And, quite frankly, they're not even in the same, they're not even close to the same thing. They're not competing at all.
Steve,
That's interesting.
In the monologue, I was kind of going through this notion about making the point about how Joe Biden is taking this strategy that, look, if a man is drowning, just let him drown. And I don't have to create an affirmative point of view about politics at all. And I was trying to make the point of how weird that is, that a politician is running and the public, for whatever reason, accepts that argument, that guy is our savior. And because that guy is our savior, he doesn't have to do anything to get our vote. And so people who are pushing for this notion of actual policy, yeah, you guys can kick rocks. And that the public should accept that. And they internalize that for some reason. One of the things I made the point, too, about is Biden's talking about public option is also now taking a back seat when you listen to his recent talks about this stuff. That, when we get in there, that's going to be pretty rough, so we're going to have to pull back on some of those policies. They're talking to some degree about austerity when they get in office. Now, how damaging is that in the context of the time that we are in, and the fact that the polls are tightening and everything else? It's possible that the public doesn't accept that. Meaning they don't accept you sleepwalking in the office, especially in the context of the time that we're in. Like, we're talking about 30 million people out of a job, or 40 million people out of healthcare. And it just seems like they're out of touch. Can you explain the problem with that thinking? Like in regards to whether or not we need to do austerity at this particular moment in time?
Oh, well, just taking it from the economic standpoint, austerity is just an absolutely insane position to take. Before this crisis even occurred, we had suffered through 40 years of neoliberal austerity that has really robbed and pillaged the average person in the U.S. of any kind of meaningful savings. So the idea of austerity, even without the pandemic, is ridiculous. Add in the pandemic, and you are talking about negligence at a level I can't even begin to put words to. It's murder, to be fair. And I see this as, you got Donald Trump, you've got Joe Biden, and Joe Biden has 40 years to look at his record. Now, let me give you this is tough to even say out loud, but let me give you the flip to that. Flip side to that is that there's very good people I know, people like Eric Hamilton, people like Stephanie Kelton, and others who are absolutely economic geniuses that are driving the narrative within the party, not necessarily as sycophants of the party so much as fighting where they think the power lies. So in that sense, there is some hope that there are some good people out there that can help push this regardless of whether we have a corpse in the office or not. And quite frankly, I think that, I'm always willing to bet on Kelton and Hamilton, Bob Hockett and others, but
Steve,
I've got
just to
40
interrupt
years.
for one moment, if they're doing
Sure.
that, then they're going to lose. Because in honest terms, the power doesn't lie there. Like the more I see
Oh,
this, I mean, if you look back at 2016, you look back at 2020, if Sanders collapses, Sanders walks out and says, my supporters are not going to back you unless you support Medicare for all. And he turns to what, 40, 50 million people and say, you shouldn't back him. What happens in comparison to now? Meaning he has no power and leverage in the context of working within the context of the party because they don't buy into his politics and they are willing to take it in order to prevent him from doing so. He does have power outside of it and bringing this kind of clear view that this is a sham, that you don't really have a representative government per se, and either the party accepts Sanders and his demand or they don't. Those are different things, but I'm making the point that he's neutered by working in the party in that way. I mean, do you think I'm wrong in that?
No, I know I don't, and I despise this. In fact, I was writing about this last night. The feeling of being herded into emptiness. I think that's the best way I can describe it because there's nothing there with Biden. It's literally an empty shell. And you see glips and phrases come out on Twitter and here and there. Probably one of his handlers put it out there, but they're trying desperately to keep this man hidden behind a wall because he's absolutely feckless. And to me, watching folks try to make this guy happen, I mean, it reminds me of that the old movie Clueless, where it's like, or Mean Girls, where it's like, stop trying to make fetch happen, stop trying to make Biden happen. Biden hasn't happened in 3 previous runs. He's not. I see him not happening this time either. But like I said, I know there are people out there that want me to listen and believe in them. I'm saying, hey guys, I've watched this election be stolen from Bernie twice. I've watched the people that have fought for this wrecked twice. And I can tell you right now, if they didn't listen to all those millions of people, and if they didn't listen during the middle of a pandemic about, Medicare for all, and if they didn't listen during a pandemic about providing, disaster recovery to individuals versus just banks, they aren't going to listen to it under any other circumstance. Now, the school's out when it comes to groups like the Sunrise Movement. These young kids are motivated and activated and ready to go. But there is a bit of that establishment element. But they, from what I've seen, there is some brightness to our future as long as we maintain that independence of getting sucked into the Borg. I think there is some opportunity there. But I do believe that Biden is an empty shell, and I do believe that Bernie, unfortunately, cost himself a lot of political clout. But I have a feeling that he didn't really have a whole lot of choice in the matter. I think we all saw that. I think that even if he was a willing participant, You see Obama once again. He's gotten off his butt twice in the last year. Once to stop Bernie, and the other to stop the NBA strike. So, the establishment is clearly saying hell no to Bernie. And even in a Politico article from Biden's speech the other night, he basically said, hey guys, do I look like a socialist? And the answer is hell no, you don't. You don't look anything like one, not even a little bit. And I think that right there, that disconnect is huge, and I think that it's going to probably cost them the election. I think people are seeing straight through it; they're not buying it. But flip side to that, Jamarl.
I want to get to this point about austerity, but I can't let that go.
Sure.
I have deep and indelible scars over what's taken place in 2020 and 2016.
Yeah.
And look, I don't know if Sanders got tired. I don't know. But I bristle at that you don't have options. Because honestly, from a strategic sense, if you're in the room with Sanders and you're talking to him, you're like, look, Sanders, you're having a hard time and you're not going to win this. However, your objective is not to win it. Your objective is to get policy accomplished. Period. Yeah. That's all. That's all you care about. Your fetish is policy. You get paid money. Oh, give me some policy. And I say that to say there's a difference in getting Joe Biden elected versus trying to get policy accomplished. Because in pushing for policy, you say, I don't have political clout within the context of the party. I do have political clout in the context of all of these groups that take direction from me. And if I go out, maybe I can't get to the sun, but maybe I can cling to the moon and say, I want one policy of Medicare for all. And I'm going to burn it to the ground with that policy. Because ultimately, I have some idea that they want to get elected. And the facade comes immediately off when you have a policy with 88% support. And you have Democrats saying no. And you have 70% support outside, and they say no. And you're in the middle of a pandemic with 40 million people without health care, and they still say no. How do you do that? Like, I'm astonished by that. Like, I would be shocked if they could pull that off.
It's insane. It's insane, dude. When I watch this, this is me as a voter, Steve, not Steve trying to look at things in this like grown-up sort of way. Steve, as a voter, says, "What the hell did you just do, dude? You screwed up. You blew it, right?" But one thing that has been drilled into my head, and I don't subscribe to this, just so we're on the same page, but I can explain it at least. There is a belief that you fall back to the winning hand, whatever that winning hand you have is, right? And Bernie is always a sort of a calculating dude that falls back on the safest plan. That ain't my style. When I saw that happen, I would have used every bit of my leverage all the way up to the convention. I would have threatened to burn it down. I would have done whatever. But he is definitely afraid of being seen as Ralph Nader, a hero of mine.
Yes, he is. Steve, let me interrupt for one moment. Let's take the break. Unfortunately, you're right about that part. You guys are listening to the voice of Steve Grumbine, political, economic, social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progressive in Action. We'll be back in a moment. Faultlines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Faultlines. Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Faultlines.
Welcome back. My name is Jamarl Thomas. You guys are listening to Faultlines with Thomas and Stranahan. My co-host is Stranahan. He's usually here floating, but right now you're seeing the head of Steve Grumbine. Steve Grumbine is a political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progressive in Action, a 501c3 and 501c4, respectively dedicated to education and advocacy for modern monetary theory. So it was my fault. We got detoured talking about politics. Like I said, I have indelible scars that come out from every so often about those elections. But I want to get into this notion of economic collapse, and I want to get into this in the context of MMT. Because from an MMT view, it is obscene that they are looking at this kind of like Great Depression moment times two. It's like a coefficient of two on top of the Great Depression moment. And they're thinking to themselves, radical centrism. Because that's what it is. It is radical at the point where you look at and say, okay, what is the role of government in this moment? And they say, we got to be centrist. That's what we got to do. That's an astonishing point of view. Can you talk about how MMT views this moment in comparison to, let's say, how a centrist, or let's say, honestly, Republican Democratic politics, because both of them view it with a similar lens?
Yeah, well, I mean, the GOP in some ways has gotten this more than the Democrats, which is terrifying. GOP has been cutting taxes, and they're helping the wrong people, okay? But they're getting the fact that being stingy isn't the way to go, except they seem to always stingy with the people, right? we the people are always on the screwed end of that one. But the Democrats, it's humorous because they've spent so long trying to play into an area that was never them. They're trying to out-Republican the Republicans. And by doing this, they figure they're going to gather a larger swath of active voters, and they figure if they can capture those moderate Republicans, they're okay. And they've been doing this since the third way. I mean, we're talking going back to the Reagan era as Clinton came through and so forth. They've been pulling to the right, trying to capture that vaunted middle space on the Republican side, but in reality, they're just recoalescing the Dixiecrats, and this concept of austerity, this concept of reducing deficits and so forth, that has always been their ploy because that's how they fire up the economy, by getting loose credit into the system versus having the federal government spend on public purpose spending. And so this tactic is one that fattens Wall Street. That's why you see a Wall Street economy that's flourishing while millions upon millions of Americans are unemployed right now. So if you look at this from an MMT perspective, MMT is a lens. It's not a prescription for anything. And you can clearly see that the availability of slack labor, the availability of massive fiscal space is right there for the taking because the economy is ground to a complete halt. Now, mind you, there are people going to work. There is reopenings of things, but we're watching a very, very different world. I mean, something like 30% GDP loss just from this alone. That's huge. And so if you think about, what the Democrats are doing here, they're literally saying we learned nothing from the last crisis. And that, we don't care because our Wall Street donors are the ones that are going to benefit from this. And we'll give you Wall Street solutions to your everyday problems. And that dog doesn't hunt.
Well, Steve, I mean, it seems like Democrats are pushing back on, are not doing this stuff simply because they're pushing back on what Republicans are doing, the limited things that Republicans are doing. And again, Republicans are doing things that would be fit under the banner of MMT, just because it seems like our spending is disconnected in an MMT way from our intake, and this just it seems like a fundamental division in terms of how you see money. I actually briefly want to go back, and I don't have time for a primer, and that would be didactic regardless. But just this idea, you used, I think, the unit of measure. We got into talking about it. There are these three sort of definitions, these interlocking definitions of a currency that I've heard, and it seems like MMT changes those a touch. So I might be getting some of this wrong. Please correct me if I am. But one is something like a unit of account. I've heard it described as unit of measure or unit of account. Another is a store of value. And then the other would be a medium of exchange. And it seems like MMT is saying that dollars can be seen primarily. They can be seen as a sort of measure, as a way of measuring the value of things. But there's this concern, which is, what if you completely unhinge? What if you completely detach your ability to understand your productive capacities? In other words, what if by government taking the reins and determining, as it already does, to be clear, the value of the money by releasing it, by doing everything, by creating more, by minting more. Again, this is as old as money is itself, but this is a perennial conversation. By doing that, don't we like get a little bit unhinged, a little bit detached, a little bit unmoored from the reality of our productive capacities, from what that money is supposed to represent? If that's that seems like a risk to me. What am I missing there? What does MMT see that I don't in that conversation?
Yeah, see, and I'm so glad you asked this, because this is probably the $1 million question. Jamarl, I want you to listen to this too, my friend. When you think about MMT, quote unquote, printing money, that is absolutely not what's happening. And this is everything, every single expenditure the federal government makes is done exactly the same way. Whenever a program is written in the law and there is actual work or whatever being compensated for, that money is created in real time. It's not like stored in a vault somewhere. So they spend that money into existence. So whether they're buying the $1 million gold, toilet seat, or whether they're paying for Medicare for all or a job guarantee, that right there is still new money, just like Social Security too, by the way. So when you think about the idea of them devaluing money, they're not devaluing because they're paying for a service. So it's, they're not just printing money and leaving it sit there for a rainy day to water down the money supply. They're actually spending that money into existence every single time. And so whenever a tax is levied of any variety, whether it's stoplight, some sort of, penalty type tax, Pagodian tax, or whether it be some sort of income tax or whatever, those taxes at the federal level are deleted. So the circuit keeps going. So the idea of them just printing money, that's all they do. It's all they ever have done. But the unprinting of that money is the taxation. So there is not a one-for-one there. The idea is spend first, tax later.
And that's so. I'm going to hand it back over to you, but I just want to sort of continue to try to interrogate this, because I still don't understand exactly what differentiates MMT from what you're saying exactly currently happens, where money is created effectively, as far as I can tell from what I've heard from you as well as other people, including Stephanie Kelton, who we've had on the show since then. Thankfully, great guest, great conversation on this topic. It's money is sort of created as a line item. Money is created as a budgetary expense. It's not, like you said, it's not stored in a vault. There's no prior supply of money that is dispersed from or whatever that's dispatched. It's that it gets created when it's needed. And so I guess my question is, what is the MMT perspective as distinct from, is it sort of that MMT is the crystallization of this latent way of doing things? Or if that makes sense, how should I see it? What terms are we using to does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, a lot of people would call this internet plumbing, right? They would call this, monetary plumbing, understanding the system, the plumbing system, right? It's like the user guide for a fiat system. But the flip side to that, and it goes more than this, is the understanding of what money is to begin with. It goes back to credit theory and understands that credit precedes, income. I mean, you issue credit out there, and money is a form of credit. It's a form of debt. And so when the U.S. government, spends this money into existence, if you will, it's doing it with the express purpose of provisioning itself. And so what is the dollar? It's nothing more than a tax credit, because otherwise the U.S. government couldn't get you to do anything. I mean, you wouldn't take that piece of paper for nothing. It's the implication or the obligation of a tax liability, that causes us to need that currency. And you can go back to the
what do you think about Steve? Steve, yes. I'm sorry, we only have a few minutes left. Sure. And we're kind of thankfully going quickly here, just in terms of pinging off of different topics. What is your opinion of? I mean, a lot of people are critical of the modern monetary system as such. A lot of people aren't critical of MMT or the Austrian school or whatever. They're just critical of things as they are, whether they're on the left or the right. However, for as long as we've had something called capitalism, we've had people who've been critical of that. What is your opinion of people who, whatever they would provide as a replacement for it, what is your opinion of people who are criticizing it as such existentially? Again, I'm just interested in asking this question because you're speaking from within the system. So what do you think of the people who are sort of attacking it?
I tend to think, when I listen to most of the people that discuss their criticisms. I typically hear people that aren't really fully understand. They're conflating bank money with federal money, with credit money, with, they don't have a full grasp of what they're critiquing. And so they know something's wrong. So in that sense, we're brothers and sisters in the struggle, okay? But where we depart is when they start assigning, some stuff to it that isn't real, right? And I think that it's part of the critique that we hear from most people that, have something to say about MMT is about the misuse of a fiat currency, not so much a misuse of MMT, because MMT just describes it. So, Republicans misuse it for war. So, hey, that's bad. And it is bad. But the idea here is that a hammer in the hands of a carpenter makes a beautiful home. A hammer in the hands of Ted Bundy makes for a lot of bodies. So it really comes down to who has that control, who's using it, what are you? And so it makes vote, if our vote ever mattered, it makes your vote matter, right? I mean, you want to make sure that you get people in there that are using these tools in a fashion that benefits the public.
Okay,
right
Steve,
now, that's
Steve,
not
this is
happening.
actually great. In our last 30 seconds, I'm pretty sure we agree. We're both pretty concerned about the people who would be using these tools who are currently in power. Do you have any tips, anything from your perspective about that issue, about the leadership, about the people who are wielding the tools, or is that outside of your bailiwick?
No, to me personally, the people that are wielding the tools are neoliberals, and neoliberals will nominate and elect and give favor to other neoliberals that share in their ideological bend. So from that standpoint, I imagine neoliberals were hired into the Federal Reserve. Neoliberals were hired in the Treasury, and neoliberalism is saturated throughout our entire society. So in order to change this, we have to actually change society as well. We got to fundamentally change the way we view money, fundamentally change the way we view each other, and fundamentally change what we think is possible. And I think that is on all of us, kind of take that ball to the next level.
Steve, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, hopefully we can have you back on soon. For those listening, that was Steve Grumbine, political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. You can follow Steve on Twitter at SDGrumbine. Also check out Real Progressives US on Twitter and go to their website, realprogressives.org. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Faultlines with Thomas and Stranahan.